Super excited to have Sammy Mclean, the shoe dog, fresh off just working a shift at the their running company Yarraville, and just about to set off to do some Run to PB programming. Sammy Mclean, welcome back to the show, mate.
Yeah, g'day, Matty. G'day, Zaka. How's things, guys?
Hey, Sammy. How are you, mate?
Good. Just, sitting in the lounge room in the studio here.
Yes, lockdown life.
Got a couple of audience members are here.
A couple of golden retrievers sussing you out down there on the ground. So, hopefully no booing or any banter from them during the show.
Might get a cameo.
Right.
Hey, Sammy, always great to have you back on, and we put it out to the listeners to fire through some questions that we'll go through a little bit later in this episode of Shoe Chat. But I guess we just want to bring you back to basics to talk about, with so many shoes evolving and new shoes coming out, super shoes and all the rest of it, but probably chatting more about the main components that go into making and designing a shoe. I think it's a really interesting point for listeners to get their head around. You want to have a chat to us about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I reckon a good starting point in terms of like how a shoe is designed would be, like, for any of the viewers at home, if you just pulled out the sock liner from a pair of shoes, most brands, or actually all brands, when their shoes are in production, they start with what's called a last. So the last is looks like the sock liner, but it's a much harder structure, and that's kind of like the starting point to the design of a shoe, and everything's kind of built around that. Like, it's almost like that's the chassis. Everything goes on top and below that. So what goes on top of the last, once it's kind of finished, is you've got the upper, and then below the last you've got the midsole, and they're really the key components to the shoes. And probably what influences and dictates how a shoe's going to work for someone or behave, it's really more the midsole. That's obviously what we focus a lot on in our chats during the shows and in the shop. The upper is important, but all the magic's kind of down below here in the midsole. Yeah, so like brands, obviously their shoes are mass produced, so they'll generally design a lot of their shoes off just a really similar kind of last. And you can kind of see that when you turn shoes upside down. Like, I've got a couple of different Nikes here. Like, if I kind of narrow in on them, you can kind of see that shape of the outer sole is very kind of similar through some different models there. If I was to do the same with a couple of like HOKA models here, again, different models, but just the shape of the shoe has that similarity between it. So that's kind of pretty much the key components to kind of the design around a shoe, is that last, that's the starting point, and everything's kind of built around that.
So then, Sammy, what would you say the key specifications are to a shoe then? Yeah,
I mean, the specs, like, this is probably more the types of conversations we have, with customers. Obviously the tech guys that work for all the brands, they're a lot more kind of knowledgeable about this stuff. But, in simple terms, we kind of talk about things like say the offset of the shoe. So when we're referring to the offset, we're talking about, the highest point in the rear foot of the midsole down to the lowest point in the forefoot of the midsole. So that's the offset there. Then we might refer to things like the stack of a shoe. So the stack of the shoe will be, the height of the midsole, like how much actual stack is under that last there. Yeah. So that's the total volume of the midsole. Some other things we might focus on when we're talking about some specs of the shoe is, like the heel counter. So in this case, you can see like it really flares away from the heel here, so it's not intruding in any way. Other parts of a shoe that are pretty important when it comes to the specs would be, when we're talking about the upper, things like the overlays. So, you know, aesthetically, it might just kind of look like some stitching and so forth on the upper. But overlays and things to do with the upper really determine like the lockdown of a shoe. You know, so, you know, is the shoe going to be nice and secure for someone here? You know, is it going to lock us in nicely through the rear foot? So there's some of the kind of design features. Probably the other, you know, feature that we're seeing a lot these days across all brands is what we call like a rocket type geometry. I'll show you a couple of examples from my shoe bundle here. Like if you look at this ASICS shoe here, like you can see that really pronounced forefoot running up there, and like quite a beveled kind of heel as well. So that's a good example of a rocket type shoe. And you pretty much see that across the board now in all models. Like, you know, here's a peg here. We've got the, you know, fairly pronounced forefoot, kind of a bit of a beveled, tapered off heel foot, rear foot as well. And then I think it was on actually our last episode, we talked a little bit about sole flaring. You know, this is something that's becoming a little bit more popular with brands, particularly to give a shoe some stability. So, you know, if you're looking at the Nike Invincible here, you can see how wide the forefoot base of the shoe is there and that rear foot platform. So that's kind of what we talk about when we're referring to like the sole flaring of a shoe. Yeah, so that's a really kind of good example, because you're not going to find many shoes that, you know, have that much width through the platform there. Yeah. So yeah, they're probably the key kind of components when we're talking about the specs of a running shoe.
Yeah, and a lot's changed over the years, and being kind here, mate, but you've been around the traps for a while in the running caper and with running shoes, but particularly over the past maybe 5 years, there's been a big shift and an evolution. Is there some things that you're noticing and you want to touch on in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I reckon this is a really good one visually, just to show a couple of, say, older style, you know, racing shoes. So if I pull out the Flyknit Streak here, like you can just see, you know, when we're referring to, say, the stack height, like there's really not a lot of foam underfoot there.
How many mil would that be?
Caught me off guard there, Zach. I'd say
like just visually, yeah.
22, 23 mil maybe. Yeah.
Crazy.
Or if I've got, I mean, this is the latest Street 7. However, this shoe hasn't changed a lot, you know, in the past 3 or 4 iterations. You know, if you go back to, I think, probably the 2015, you know, all the big marathons that year, this kind of, that was the winning shoe.
Yeah.
You know, like that's what Kipchoge was winning shoes in. You know, and here we are kind of 5 years later, and, you know, you can just see that change in, you know, stack underneath, the amount of foam, you know, the geometry of the shoe. Yeah, so there's been a lot of changes in racing shoes there. Absolutely, yeah.
And what about any changes in the daily trainers?
Yeah, probably across the board, just the rocket shape of the shoes. You know, so I've got an older style, got the old Peg 33 here. You know, it just looks a lot kind of flatter through the shoe. You know, whereas a bit more of a, you know, a common kind of daily trainer these days, just, yeah, it's really got those pronounced rocker aspects. You know, even like if you look at, say, what HOKA are doing here with this shoe, like you can see like how it's kind of a little bit kind of cut away through the rear foot. So we're getting some, you know, some kind of quite innovative ways to disperse load when we're coming down through the heel as well, just with like little cutaways like that. Yeah, and you know, just going back to the design features, like, you know, just the way that heel counters are working. Like personally right now, I've got some Achilles issues, and just having some heel counters that don't intrude on the Achilles actually makes a big difference. Yeah, so some pretty kind of clear examples there just through, the older style racing shoes, how flat, they kind of look, not a lot of foam, and now we're just plenty of foam and, underfoot there. Yeah. And the weight,
Hey, Sammy,
the weight's a big.
Was that the shoe that, was that the shoe that Kipchoge wore in a marathon and he wasn't wearing them properly? And like the heel, I thought like the inner sole came out.
Inner sole came out, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was a street.
There is the.
Was that it?
I think it's actually that was the streak. It probably would have been the streak 5. So we're up to number 7 here. But yeah, there's a good photo of him, or maybe not so good, but the sock line is basically like that, and he's. I think it was the London Marathon, 2014 or 2015. Yeah. So it's really come a long way in 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah. Really puts it in perspective, seeing that streak and the next percent and the amount of foam that is in the back end of like the second half of that shoe is unbelievable. Yeah. Yeah. Well, even like this shoe, the fly knit streak. I mean, I've got some photos from, I reckon it was the 2016 AV season, and I was just wearing that in every race, whereas I kind of can't imagine putting something on so flat now without much kind of bounce and life to it. It's probably going to be a bit of a collector's item soon, that this one.
Yeah, it's definitely amazing to see the change, and obviously over the last 5 years there's been a huge shift in, like, compared to probably 30, 40 years, like some of the biggest sort of shifts in shoes that we've seen for quite some time. Now we also had we put out a option for some of our Instagram followers to shoot through some questions, and we got quite a few through, and we picked out some to shoot off to you, Sammy. So the first one came in from John. What are some good alternatives to super shoes for tempo runs at the moment?
Yeah, cool. I mean, we've kind of got this whole like fast session category of shoes now. So these are the, like the sister shoes or the training companion shoes to the super shoes. Probably one thing I could say that's, a little bit different about a super shoe and a fast session shoe is probably how rigid the forefoot is. So if we look at the Vaporfly here, so the Nike super shoe, like you can see how that's really kind of stiff up through that forefoot. That's good in that, it gives us that nice kind of responsive, snappy feel off the road. But in training, sometimes it's nice to feel like a little bit of compliance under that part of the foot. So if I showed you like a really good fast session shoe, this is the Saucony Speed, you can just see there's a little bit more flex up through that forefoot. Yeah, so it's just, you get a little bit more of a sense of what your toes are doing, what the foot's doing. It's not as snappy and it's not as kind of like fast off the ground, but just almost a bit more of an accommodating type feel to the foot. So, going back to that other point about how shoes have changed, like I've got an old, what have we got here? The Zoom Elite 9, like that was quite a popular fast session shoe, I reckon, 4 or 5 years ago. Like a lot of people loved this shoe. It was almost like quite a hybrid model because some people use it as a daily trainer. You could run half marathons in it. It had quite a nice kind of waffle type outer sole to it. So it was quite versatile for things like, firm grass races or gravel kind of runs. But, again, like that's kind of where fast session shoes were. And this is kind of where we are. Yeah. So we've still got some of the similar components to a super shoe. Like we can see that high stack, a lot of foam underfoot, but just maybe not as rigid up through the forefoot. Yeah, it's probably going to be a broader range of runners as well. Yeah, I hope that kind of helps John there with his. So
and And talking more about super shoes, there's a question here from his handles HSU Michael. He's asking around marathon shoes, Vaporfly versus Alphafly. Probably a controversial one. I know a lot of people are talking about this one. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, just from looking at runners, I would almost say the more elite a runner, they seem to be gravitating more towards the Vaporfly. I don't have an Alphafly here to show you, but I would say that seems to be more of the go-to shoe for, you know, your elite, semi-elite type runner. Yeah, so that's, look, it's often like a lot of things with shoes, it's, you know, it's kind of personal preference. I know you guys have played around a little bit with, you know, the Alphafly and the Vaporfly. Yeah, but I'd say the trends that I'd see would be more, you know, the Alphafly, probably more your everyday weekend runner, and then the Vaporfly seems to be a little bit more for those faster runners. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And yeah, the last question we had here from Sarah, who I coach, she asked, how many pairs of shoes is too many?
I don't know about that one to you, Sammy.
A bit of a running joke in the shop with how many shoes I've got. Look, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question in that it probably highlights how shoes shift load when we run. So we can't change the amount of load that's going into a runner's body through one shoe to another. Like, you know, if a runner weighs 60 kilograms, that 60 kilograms is always going into the runner's body and being dispersed somehow, up through their body. But different shoes will, you know, influence how we might shift load through our body. So, you know, again, if I pull out that, you know, like the streak here, like quite a, you know, minimal kind of offset, you know, quite low to the ground. You know, naturally a shoe like this is probably going to load more, you know, a runner's Achilles, calves, you know, that area of their body. Whereas, you know, a shoe of, you know, higher stack, you know, a little bit more of a rocket feel. Maybe I'll use the Glide Ride for this. You know, that's really going to take a runner's load away from that rear foot, but potentially kind of put it elsewhere. Yeah, so I think when it comes to your rotation, you just always want to be mindful of, you know, are you shifting load too much from a day-to-day basis? And, you know, the areas where that load is going, you know, is your body kind of strong enough to withstand that? Yeah. So, you know, there's obviously pros and cons to, you know, to having various shoes in your rotation. Just want to be mindful of, you know, how those shoes work for each individual runner. Yeah.
And I know you talked about in the last episode about support shoes as well. So maybe there's a role for them for some runners that are doing a bit more higher mileage, maybe on the second run days, or I wonder if that's something you've that's the Invincible. Would that be sitting in there as well as a support shoe?
Not so much a support shoe. I mean, I don't actually have a support shoe here that I can kind of show you what's different about them, but it's often through the medial column here of a shoe that on a support shoe you'll see like a much firmer, denser foam, or maybe even like something external that's been added to the shoe. Another feature of a support shoe is often through the midfoot here, you'll see like some type of truss that really kind of adds a bit of rigidity to the midfoot there, because that's probably where a runner tends to become unstable through their gait, is through that kind of midfoot section. So by, you know, adding something in there, it just means the shoe isn't going to be as flexible and unstable through that part. Yeah. But look, I think, it's good to have different shoes in your rotation. It's good to actually mix up, the load on the body. You just want to make sure that, you're shifting that load to an area that, can withstand that. Yeah. So always make subtle changes with your rotation if you are introducing a new shoe. Yeah.
Yeah, there's such a variety out there of shoes these days. I feel like it's just expanding so much. Like every month, there's just a new type of shoe coming out.
Yeah. I mean, look, you could have, if you had 5 shoes that had the same offset, similar stack height, similar shape and everything, there's probably going to be very minimal risk there, but you're not really going to get much benefit either out of, the different functions of that shoe on your body. So it'd be more, I suppose the kind of risk factors you'd be looking at is like, you had 2 shoes that were like 10 mil or 12 mil offset, and then you had 2 that might have been like 4 mil offset. You can kind of see there how that's a quite a significant change in a shoe. So yeah, just want to make sure that you're okay with that change when you're using them. Awesome. And weight's probably the other thing that's, is a kind of like a different factor with a shoe. Obviously you're going to have less weight on those faster shoes, a bit more weight on those daily trainers. So, but I reckon that's a pretty safe thing to play around with. Yeah, you're not going to have too much risk, having one shoe that might be 200 grams and another shoe that's, 330 grams. Yeah.
Fantastic, mate. Always great to have you on, and they can listeners and can come down and visit you down at the Yarraville Running Company, and also you're coaching a lot of people at the moment. So the marathon, there's still spots open for you with Melbourne Marathon programs.
Yeah, about 11 weeks to go. So yeah, still in the early stages, but a lot of people are pretty accountable now with their training, which is good. And no doubt a lot of people got out yesterday on the Sunday long run and stuck to the 2-hour restrictions down here in Melbourne.
Exactly.
Well,
thanks very much, Sammy, for jumping on and showing us probably like, I don't know, a fifth of the collection of your shoes, I'd imagine, hanging around. Very appreciative of your time, and taking us through some of your rotation as well.
Pleasure, guys, and good to see the dogs down here haven't interrupted. So all good. Yeah.
Good stuff, Sammy. Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers, Zaka. Cheers, Matty.
Thanks, mate.